Good evening, classmates. My name is Mario Morse. First, I'd like to apologize for not being able to be there with you tonight and do this presentation in person, but I had a very important meeting that I was unable to miss. First, I'd like to say that reading through The Weeping and the Playtime of Others has really kind of hit close to home for me as a father of 4 daughters. I could not even begin to imagine my children going through the horrible conditions and the abuse that these children have endured through many of these stories in The Weeping and the Playtime of Others. The chapter I've been charged with is the first chapter in part 4, which is the politics of corruption. And chapter 14 is the jobs, kickbacks, $1 million contracts, and Wells Fargo line. I'd like to start off with reading a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., which says, "He who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as who helps to precipitate it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it." We find so often in this chapter, in this section of the book, people who with power and prestige who have the opportunity to do better but choose to turn a blind eye. The crimes have been perpetrated in the name of the saving of our children or the helping of our youth, all while making money and power for individual gain. As a society, we must be appalled at this and always be moved to do better, no matter the circumstances, for our children who have little opportunity and chance of being heard. The first example that is given in this chapter is from Dr. Joseph D. Ferry's Artesia Hall, which is a for-profit center for disturbed children outside of Houston, Texas, or was. Here, a young girl named Dana was caught with her boyfriend and was put into solitary confinement. During this time of solitary confinement, she just couldn't take it anymore. And on her 17th birthday, she chose to swallow roach poison. Instead of giving her proper medical treatment, Dr. Farr started pulling her hair and hitting her and for supposedly faking this illness. So he gave her some medicine to induce vomiting and told her to walk the grounds, and still didn't help. And on the 12th of November, she started having convulsions. Again, Dr. Farr refused to give her the proper medical attention and put her in a straitjacket. Then he finally took her to the hospital, and on November 14th, she died. It was too late. So, at this time, her death was ruled accidental. And then after a year-long investigation was ruled a homicide, and Dr. Farrow was brought up on charges. But what's really interesting about this time is that the director for the Welfare Regional Licensing Supervisor, a lady by the name of Ruth Irma, who was in charge of licensing these facilities during this time, fought the state and the powerful politicians to reject the licensing for the Artesia Hall. But she failed to do so in battling these high-powered lawyers and politicians. So for her reward for that, she went from being a supervisor with faculty to a clerk who had to ask permission to go to the bathroom. And soon later, she was fired and let go from her job. And this is an example of how the threat and intimidation to stand up to corruption can lead people to turn a blind eye to these type of situations. You know, during that same facility, local law enforcement was of very little help as they were receiving a $25 bounty for each child they returned who had run away. And these children were then subjected to a cool box, which was a 4x4x6 wooden box, which was surrounded by barbed wire. And move on to another example is the Ohio Youth Department, which the author stated as totally and disgracefully political. One practice of the commissioner of the department was to mail out to all of his department staff at least once a year, reminding them of their obligation to the political party that gave them their jobs. Depending on their position and their salary, they were expected to pay the Democratic Party as little as $10 all the way up to $500 a year. And this is in the early 70s, mind you, that inflation is different. So, not only was this practice done, but the hiring practice also depended upon their party affiliation. They weren't hired on for their qualifications alone. And this cost a young boy his life. He had put a towel over his face and sprayed deodorant down his throat and froze his lungs. The investigative report says that the child's life could have been saved if there was a nurse or doctor on duty. But according to their public relations, the position was not yet filled because the department could not find a registered Democrat at the time. Now we move on to Cook County, Illinois, which is, as we all know, is where the first juvenile court was established. Even they're not immune to corruption. In the 1970s, they maintained a partnership system under the guise of the Division of School Attendance, which was worth between $2.8 million and $4 million tax dollars a year. Ed Carter, a social worker, was hired to review these truancy and claims, and was hired and became a threat to this frivolous jobs scheme that they had going on. He found that many of the children had legitimate reasons for truancy, for being absent from school, such as death in the family, just true medical reasons. And he cut the workload of the truancy judge by 25%. Well, of course, that threatened the job machinery that they had going on there in Illinois and Cook County. And so in the next school year, he was transferred for budget reasons. The last example I'll give you in this presentation in the corruption of wealth is Father Flanagan's Boys Town, a famed Catholic home for homeless boys in Nebraska. It started with good intentions in 1917, and soon in the late 1930s, a movie was made about them, and which gave them great exposure and opportunity to raise money for this great program that Father Flanagan was doing. But by 1974, Boys Town had a net worth of $266 million and growing. And however, in 1972, 1,500 boys were turned away from the facilities, and mainly a lot of them were due to because their IQ was below 80. Also, one former director stated that every effort of the Boys Town, Flanagan's Boys Town, the primary objective was to make money, and the child's welfare became secondary. And even despite the large net worth of the organization, they still solicited funds from the federal government for many different aspects of their operation. And also, with their large net worth, they still had dormitories that were unkept and in despair. And in some cases, they didn't have toilet paper for the kid. Corruption of money and power will ultimately lead any person or organization to disaster. Again, we must always strive to do better for our youth, to always tell ourselves we have not done enough, and to follow through on our promises and our obligations. We must be a voice against the corruption for those who have no voice. And I will close with a famous quote from Edmund Burke that says, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." Thank you.